What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. And Chris, we had an eventful day today during this summer season, and it had to do with Summer League. It was the first time that the media got to talk to some of the guys in the Summer League mini camp series before they head out to Las Vegas. And Chris, this is something that we've talked about previously about how there's little to be taken away from a summer league and how players are trying to get themselves acclimated to the season and some to the NBA. So, what did you take away from today's meeting with a couple of different players when it comes to what happens going forward and going to Las Vegas?
Well, first of all, are the people that say that I only do these podcasts from a jail cell in my basement, are they happy now? Because here I am in the middle of my dining room. My wife is upstairs trying to sleep. My son is upstairs trying to sleep. I usually go with what's the most convenient, where I can find the most quiet when my son is awake and when my wife is awake. Or I try and go to a place where my voice is not going to boom through the house and make it problematic for them to sleep. And my wife is a very, very light sleeper. Very light sleeper. Like, she has earplugs in her ears. She sets multiple alarms. She has like an air purifier going just for sound. And she still hears me every time I'm on the phone late at night or every time I'm doing a podcast. But I got so much stuff from people about the decor in my basement and how it looks like I'm in a jail cell doing this podcast. So I decided to sit here at my dining room table with this beautiful mirror behind me and the reflection of my kitchen in the background. So now people won't rip on me for living in a jail cell.
I mean, Chris, I don't never understand or know what you see that we get comments about from our YouTube or from our subtexters or anything. And I obviously we've talked about it. I read everything so I could get a sense of everything that's going on. And I read that and I was like, there is an occasion where it's just a white brick wall background for Chris. And I'm like, well,
It's every time that I need it to be really, really quiet, and I just go in my basement. And my basement is just basically Elliot's playroom. There's also a washer and dryer. There's a workbench, and there's a treadmill down there. But it's not something that we decorated or anything along those lines. We saved the pictures and the decorations for an office, for a bedroom, for a spare bedroom, and all that kind of stuff. And I had a picture hanging up on that wall, actually, but it's kind of like a concrete / cement wall, and it's not easy to hang things on that. So I tried like one of those two-sided sticky things, and I smashed it up against the wall. But I was doing a podcast. I was doing a national podcast with Zach Lowe, and all of a sudden I'm in the middle of a conversation about Donovan Mitchell or Jared Allen or Dean Wade or one of the many things that we talked about on that podcast. And the thing just falls right behind me. I'm like, well, yeah, so that was that. And we're just going to leave that there. And now it's a blank wall behind me instead of a Cleveland sign picture and the downtown skyline and the Kobe Bryant picture that I had there, because it just doesn't stay up there. And I just don't want a situation to happen where we're doing the podcast and all of a sudden it just plunk drops right down.
I think that's fair because I can only imagine being on probably live TV or whatever it was, or doing a podcast and just being like, okay.
Yeah. Well, that just dropped right behind me and made a loud thud. So we'll just ignore that. And what were you saying about Dean Wade again there, Zach? Okay, yes, great. And to your point, Ethan, I am not somebody who looks at comments. There was a mentor that I have had for a very, very long time that said, Chris, you will drive yourself crazy if you look at the comments. Now, I have a radio background, and, Twitter was a big part of the shows that I did and the interactions that I had. You wanted to use those throughout your show, your 5-hour show or however long it was, to kind of get a different voice in there and a different perspective in there. But now that I'm not really doing as much radio as I did in the past, I try not to look at the comments on X, formerly Twitter, because they can just be so nasty. They can be so ridiculous. And I think the only reason why I saw that notification pop up is because I obviously have the YouTube app on my phone because we post YouTube shorts, and I have it connected to the cleveland.com account because I'm one of the people that runs the cleveland.com YouTube account for the Cavs. So because I have that app, it's set up to receive notifications, and that one popped up. I think it was in the middle of the night or something like that. I got up to pee. I went back to my bed and I looked to see if anything happened breaking news wise. And I have this notification from a YouTube user about me being in a jail cell doing the podcast. So that was pretty funny in the middle of the night.
To be clear, for all of our listeners, I saw Chris today at Summer League minicamp practice. He was not in a jail cell, so let's make sure that that's clear. I mean, I'm very surprised that I haven't gotten comments about my very bland background in my second room that has nothing going on, or my lighting that continuously changes. So if you're on the YouTube channel and you see me flash this Rubik's Cube to get my color to balance back, sorry about it, but anyway, thinking about this Cavs team, thinking about what is going on in Summer League, you going to Las Vegas on Thursday for those kind of festivities. The difference that it comes to is how everybody is trying to get their own little perspective when it comes to the Summer League season, especially with a new coaching staff, a new environment, and obviously the new players. So we got to talk to Jordan Ott for the first time today. He was able to talk about how this is not his first rodeo as a Summer League head coach. This is actually his third time with 3 different organizations that he's been a head coach when it comes to Summer League, and he loves it. He's a guy that gets involved and feels like he gets to learn how to be a better coach for Kenny Atkinson while being around the guys and learning them, especially when you have guys like Craig Porter Jr. and Emani Bates that are going to be around the Cavs organization, or Emani Bates potentially. He got a qualifying offer. Who knows what happens with that? But that will be around the team going forward in the season, and just being able to pick and choose and figure out who these guys are. So, Chris, what did you get from the conversation that we had with Jordan Ott and getting to meet him for the first time?
Seems like a really smart guy. I thought one of the things that he said, Ethan, was interesting in terms of, and this is to be expected, but for him to say it in terms of the system that they're going to use at Summer League is going to be somewhat dictated by the personnel that they're going to use, but it's also going to be with the understanding that this is how Kenny wants the team to run when training camp starts and when the regular season starts. And he did say that they're going to do different things starting in Summer League. So look, you're not going to have a great gauge at Summer League of what the new Cavs offense is going to look like or something like that. Because you don't have Darius Garland, you don't have Donovan Mitchell, Max Strus, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, George Niang, Dean Wade, those guys that are going to be in the every night rotation. But I think you're going to see some of the Kenny Atkinson influence of what he wants this offense to look like start to show itself a little bit in Summer League, especially when it comes to how they're going to use Craig Porter Jr., who could be in the rotation this coming year, especially with how they're going to use Jaylen Tyson, their first-round rookie, because he could be fighting for playing time if Kenny Atkinson's going to go 11, 12 deep in certain games during the regular season. He'll probably be in that kind of mix. So that was something that I thought was interesting that Jordan Ott said. The other thing is just how he's approaching Summer League and the things that he's looking for as a coach, because, you know, these roles that these guys are going to be in at Summer League aren't necessarily going to be the ones that they're going to have during the regular season. And I think he has an understanding of that. So he said, hey, we're keeping it pretty simple. We're just here to get better. It's not just the players that are trying to get better. It's the coaches. I mean, Jordan Ott got here a week ago. Johnny Bryant just got here. DeMarre Carroll just got here. So they're all in the same kind of situation of we're learning here on the fly. We're trying to get better. We're trying to figure out what works for us we're in different roles right now, just like the players are going to be in different roles. So it's kind of like a learning process for the coaches as much as it is for the players. And this is really Jordan Ott's first opportunity to be around this group of guys and try and understand, okay, what makes Emani Bates tick, right? What's the best way to interact with Jaylon Tyson? What's the best way to coach Craig Porter Jr.? And then he can relay that information to Kenny Atkinson so that he has that information since he's not going to be around, since he's going to fulfill his commitment with the French national team.
The other thing that you mentioned very briefly, Damari Carroll is now on the assistant coaching staff for Kenny Atkinson, and he was in the building for the Summer League minicamp practice today. And Chris, at the end of everybody doing their official work and all the press conferences and things of that nature being done, the assistant coaches and the trainers were getting after it in a little bit of a 3-on-3 competition afterwards. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, is it really fair to have Damari Carroll on either team who's still probably has the ability to play in the NBA, not in a high role or anything, but he's not old. He's not like, he was fluid, giving it to the basket and just posting guys up. It felt unfair, but off topic. But I feel like you mentioned Craig Porter Jr., and he is a guy who came in and used Summer League to kind of catapult himself into the eye line of the Cavs in his rookie season. Rookie, freshman, same thing. But it felt like he is now a veteran. And we've heard other guys talk about it. Jordan Ott mentioned it, that he felt like this is Craig Porter Jr.'s quote-unquote group to mold and help grow throughout the season and throughout the Summer League, especially because he is a veteran in the sense of the Summer League. And he won a championship in his first time playing with the Cavaliers last season. So, Chris, what did you get a sense of from Craig Porter Jr. in today's presser when we got to talk to him? And what do you expect from him when it comes to growing as a leader in this Summer League stint?
Yeah, that's the big thing. And Jordan Ott mentioned it, and Craig was alluding to it. He's kind of taken ownership of this team. Obviously, Jaylen Tyson is looking toward him. DJ Burns looking toward him. All these rookies that are going through this for the first time, they're looking toward him. Luke Travers, who has never stepped foot on a meaningful NBA court outside of Summer League, is looking toward Craig Porter Jr. It's a weird situation for him to be in, given his story and given the fact that he was an undrafted rookie last year. He started on a two-way, but then he earned a standard contract, and he made an impact for this team at the beginning of the season in meaningful NBA games, including the in-season tournament. So he's trying to take ownership of this team, and I think that's something that seems to come natural to him, Ethan. Guys gravitate toward him. Guys respond toward him. And obviously, there are different aspects of his game that he's going to work on throughout the course of this offseason. And there are points of emphasis that he's going to have from this coaching staff going into Summer League. But one of the biggest ones is, can you run the second unit, right? Can you be the leader on the floor when Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell aren't out there for certain stretches? Can you take ownership of a team and ownership of an offense? And it seemed like, he carried himself today, and he has carried himself in practice the last couple of days from my sources that I've talked to that have been there, as the guy who is the captain of this team, the guy who is the leader of this Summer League team. And I think that's something that the Cavs want from Craig Porter Jr. Use your voice, find your voice. Don't take a step back just because Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, and some of these other guys are here. Everybody is going to have ownership in one way or another. Everybody's going to lead in a certain way. And for Craig, for him to say that specifically beyond the, hey, my 3-point shot, or make teams pay when they go under, or pick and roll efficiency, or the usual stuff that guys say, for him, it's talking about trying to find his voice and using his voice in a way that will allow him to better flourish in the role that he could potentially have moving forward for this organization. Because the Cavs do, Ethan, members of this organization, including the front office that gave him that standard NBA contract, they view him as a backup point guard.
And he's a competitor. Like, he wants to get
Yep.
after it. He wants to learn. He wants to grow his game. And in part, that is one, him missing the playoffs and being on the sideline, having to watch from afar and not be able to contribute and feel like he could have helped in different aspects, especially in the second unit. But then using that as fuel going into this off season. And he said that he picks brains of guys like Karis LeVert and how they operate in the offseason, how they look at defenses and where they can pick their spots and things of that nature. And you mentioned it. He did talk about needing to improve his three-point shooting and needing to grow his game from beyond the arc. But that's all known. That's stuff that he knows that he has to do to be better and to improve and to get to where he wants to go. But the mental side of Craig Porter Jr. feels like it has always been there since he got here. I mean, the maturity, the want, the know-how. And he credits that to his 5 years in college, right? Junior college to Wichita State. And it feels like all of that experience has helped him mold into the player that he wants to be. But now he's taken on a new role as kind of a mentor, right? Because Jaylen Tyson is a new guy, a rookie, kind of trying to do the same thing that Craig Porter Jr. does. I mean, what rookie doesn't want to get a standard NBA contract fresh out, right? And you think about Jaylen Tyson, who said that he had been running kind of as the shotgun to Craig Porter Jr. as the number 2 in certain offenses. But we also know that Jaylen Tyson is 6'6", 6'7" with shoes on and is going to be put in the opportunity to sometimes play that small forward role as well. So I think it's important to see how Jaylen Tyson is kind of learning from Craig Porter Jr., but also trying to see where he can fit his game in, not only in the Summer League roster, but also how he can fit into the rotation for the Cavs. So, Chris.
Yeah, so that's the thing, Ethan. I think that's a really good point that you make, because for some of these young guys, it's about fitting into a role that is very different than the one that you had in college, right? If you think about Jaylen Tyson, he was the 3rd leading scorer in the Pac-12. He did everything for Cal because he had to, and because that was the role that he established, and that's the role that coaching staff put in him. But if you think about him coming to this team, this is an established team. This is a team that is coming off an Eastern Conference semifinals appearance. This is a team that has, depending what happens throughout the rest of this offseason, a lot of the nightly rotations are already earmarked for guys that have more experience than him, that have accomplished more in the NBA than he has had the opportunity to. So he's fighting an uphill battle just to get consistent minutes. And when it comes to him trying to get minutes early in his career, it's not necessarily going to be doing the things that he did at Cal, right? Doing the things that made him the 20th overall pick, because some of those things the Cavs don't need. And that's something that Craig alluded to too. It was about finding your way. How do you fit within the fabric of a championship team? How can you stand out? How can you separate yourself? And Craig even talked about it today. He said, I came to the Cavs. I didn't think I was going to play early in my career. And I didn't think they were going to need me to score the basketball early in my career, because they got Donovan, because they got Darius, because they've got Karis LeVert, because they've got Jared Allen and Max Strus and Evan Mobley and other guys that can do those things at a higher level in the NBA than I can, right? So it's about trying to figure out, okay, how can I best fit on this team? How can I find a way to separate myself? And that's going to be a challenge, I think, for somebody like Jaylen Tyson. Like, it's not a situation where the Cavs are saying, okay, we understand that you can be a big playmaking wing. We're going to take that away from you. No, it's not that. They're going to try and tap into those things. Jordan Ott talked about using him as a point guard at times, a combo guard other times, a small forward other times, so they understand his versatility and how that can be a benefit. But when it comes to the NBA level, it's not going to be high usage, ball dominant player. Not on this roster. It's going to be, can you make an impact? Can you provide a spark off the bench in short bursts when the ball is not in your hands constantly, when you're a secondary playmaker or a tertiary playmaker. You know what I mean? And I think all rookies have to try and figure that out. But Jaylen Tyson specifically, because, yeah, he was a first round pick, but the team that he's going to, they don't need him right away. And they don't necessarily need the things that he was asked to do at Cal. And it's going to be, this is a good proving ground for him to kind of take a little step back, allow Craig Porter Jr. to run the team, run the offense, and see if Jaylen can play off of him in a way that, at Cal he didn't have to.
And Craig already kind of gave his stamp of approval to Jaylen Tyson based on the couple practices that they've had together and just the energy that he brings. He was talking about Jaylen Tyson diving for balls at summer league practice and how that kind of raised his eyebrows. Like, if you're going to do that during summer league, okay, now we going to have some conversations about what you're willing to do. And I feel like that's just a testament to the truth and honesty of what Jaylen Tyson has said about himself previously. And we've talked about it. He said that he mimics his game off of, or looks at his game kind of like a player like Caleb Martin and Josh Hart. The gritty, dirty kind of guys that are willing to do whatever it takes for their team. And I know we've both seen Josh Hart flying for loose balls and all those kinds of things. It's just an understanding that there are roles for this team, and Jaylen Tyson feels like he's willing to make the adjustment. And I mean, you talked about it. There's a rotation, and if he's used in that second, third, fourth unit, whatever Kenny Atkinson does, there's an opportunity for him to be on the floor with guys like Craig Porter Jr., Sam Merrill, him at the 3, Dean Wade, and then whoever they play at the 5. And you think about the spacing that comes with that and how many times that Craig Porter Jr. can create for that offense. Jaylen Tyson can create. Sam Merrill draws eyes. Those are the type of things that this Cavs organization is thinking about and trying to put the pieces together and figure out what rotations go well together to not only space the floor, but also to create offense in different schemes like we've talked about with Kenny Atkinson trying to lean into. But Chris,
I talked to Jaylen. I talked to Jaylen today. We all did. And I asked him specifically, Ethan, I said, how do you plan to stand out at Summer League? How do you plan to stand out when you get to training camp with the Cavs? And he mentioned, Ethan, play defense at a high level. And that's one of the knocks on him. If you talk to any analyst, if you talk to any scout going into the draft process, that was one of the questions that they had with him. Also, the reliability of his outside shot, especially his 3-point shot. But nobody was talking about his defense. If anything, they said that that was a weakness that he needed to fix. So for him to say, play defense at a high level, limit my mistakes as much as possible, and then hit open threes, I think he understands kind of the role that he's going to be thrust into in the NBA, and the role that would probably make him the most successful in the NBA if he can play to it and if he can be effective in it. And he also mentioned that he's a driver by nature. That's something that he likes to do. He likes to put it on the deck, get to the rim, can score at all 3 levels, but more of a driver than a shooter. And he's somebody who wants to drive. And that's kind of how he's been programmed. That's what he's been able to do at every single level that he's played at. But he's got teammates shouting at him to shoot the ball. He's got coaches already shouting at him to shoot the ball and take those open shots. So that's going to be a transition for him as well. But it shows a willingness to adapt his game, a willingness to try to fit in. It also shows that he has some habits as a player that he's going to have to break in order to be most effective for this team with this roster makeup.
Yeah, and Chris, 2 things on that notion before we move on to the next player that we talked to. I mean, Jaylen Tyson is, like you said, known as a driver and already getting yelled at by coaches to do those things. It feels like that is a common theme for this team from last year, following over to this season and into Summer League with Dean Wade. Guys yelling at Dean Wade to shoot the ball. begging for him to shoot the ball when he was open and taking the right looks. Because there are guys like this that feel like they have to make the right play every single time down the floor. And obviously, if you're a guy that's new to the league and trying not to show as many mistakes and showing that you can fit in, you want to do what you're good at rather than doing something that might make you look a little bit worse. But taking those shots is what's going to be a development for Jaylen Tyson, because we know that he needs to shoot the ball at a high efficiency to get the minutes that he wants. The other portion of that is playing defense. In his introductory press conference, Jaylen Tyson said, I understand that the only box that I have unchecked is defense. And so I'm going to focus on that and say, I want to make all defensive team in my rookie season. Huh? You're going to do a whole 180 from what you're known for and say, I'm going to focus on defense. And I mean, sure, he didn't say necessarily he was aiming for first team, but Victor Wembanyama, I believe, is the only rookie to ever make NBA for all defensive first team in his rookie season. So or it's been a long time since it's happened. But I mean, that's just something that I noticed from him, and we've touched on his ability and his willingness to mold his game. But the other thing and the other player, when we're talking about earning minutes, is Luke Travers. And you mentioned it, Chris. This is a guy who hasn't played an NBA game since getting drafted in 2022 in the second round. And he's been playing in Australia, and he's been playing in the NBL league. And I feel like this is his third summer league, if I'm not mistaken. And it's just looking at how he continues to grow. He understands that what he needs to do is shoot more efficiently, as I feel like we've said for everybody that we've talked about, but also just getting into the mold and getting into the understanding of what this team needs from him to be able to bring him over to this roster. And Chris, I don't know. I feel like you more so have conversations with guys about the growth of these players overseas and what the opportunities are looking like for them to come over to the roster for the Cavs. And I remember that you talked about with him today, with Luke Travers today, about a conversation you had with Matthew Dellavedova. Do you mind sharing that with our fans?
Yeah, so when was that? I think that was April, Ethan. Delly was in Los Angeles, and the Cavs played back-to-back games against the Lakers and Clippers, and I've known Delly for years. Obviously, I covered him when he was part of the championship roster and when he was celebrating at the parade and whatnot. So I went over and I had a conversation with him about a bunch of stuff. Obviously, his family. We both have kids. We were talking about that, being fathers. But I also brought up Luke, and I said, hey, look, you've played with Luke. You're playing with him this year. What's your view of him? Because I know that the Cavs have, spent time in Australia and they went to go watch him as well. They've invested in him. They made him a second round draft pick for a reason. And I just said, do you think, you know what it takes to be in the NBA? Do you think that Luke Travers is an NBA player? And Delly did not hesitate. He said, without a doubt, absolutely. He thinks the game the right way at an NBA level. And Delly mentioned some of the same things that Luke mentioned today. The swing skill for Luke Travers has always been his shooting, right? He's not the most athletic guy. He plays very similar to an Australian, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. He plays the right way. He's tough, variety of different positions, multifaceted skill set, does a little bit of everything offensively and defensively. But for him, the swing skill is, can he knock down outside shots consistently? If he's going to play the power forward spot at the NBA level and be a stretch forward, can he do that consistently? Can he create enough space to knock down shots? Can he play within the fabric of a team in that particular role when he doesn't really have the ball in his hands, where he's not initiating at the elbow, where he's not doing as much DHO type stuff? You know what I mean? And Delly said, obviously, the shooting is the thing that so many people have talked about when it comes to Luke, but he has worked on it consistently. He busts his butt in the gym to try and become a better shooter. We saw him a little bit today on the court, Ethan, and it was a higher arc than what I remember it being last summer league and the year before that too. So you can see some of the mechanical changes that he has made from that standpoint. And if he becomes a reliable, consistent, knockdown outside shooter, I think there is a place for him down the road in the NBA. I don't think it's, a big role in a rotation on a team that has championship aspirations the way that the Cavs do moving forward. But I certainly think there's a place for him in the NBA. And like I said, the conversation that I had with Delly, somebody who has spent a lot of time around Luke, somebody that I trust in terms of his basketball IQ, and what he understands it takes to be in the NBA. Delly believes that Luke is an NBA player. And not only did he say that to me, Luke admitted today that Delly has said that multiple times to him. I'm trying to instill that confidence in him so that Luke starts to believe that as well.
And I think you mentioned it briefly, Chris, about him not having a huge role. And that's something that Luke Travers talked about today. He mentioned that he understands he would be a role player. He understands that his goal is to be a great or a good role player on a team. He's not looking to be a star player. He's not looking to be a starter or anything of that sort. He's looking to get his due, get his time, get his opportunities to show that he can play at that level. And the other thing that you mentioned is being able to shoot at a high level and consistently. And you're right, we did get to see a lot of different guys shoot today that are coming straight out of college or having not a whole lot of experience when it comes to training every single day and making it their job. And it reminded myself earlier, I was like, we are so spoiled when we get to watch some of the best shooters in the world. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, if you don't shoot 40% from three, you suck at shooting three-pointers. I promise you, if you come to a gym with Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, even Emani Bates, who is water when it comes to shooting standing shots, like, those guys are going to knock down those shots a whole lot more than you ever could. Like, I go to a rec league, to a YMCA, and I'll go shoot, and I'm like, good God, I suck because I'm comparing myself to Donovan Mitchell, or I'm comparing the guys I'm playing with, and I'm like, where's the basketball IQ? Y'all aren't thinking about what I've been seeing for the last, and I think that's the reality of the situation when it comes to Luke Travers. Is like he's playing with guys that are great, right? He's playing in the NBL. He's not playing in some rec league. He's playing in a professional league against guys that are competitive, right? But there's still going to be a little bit of a step from the NBL to the NBA. And that is the jump that he's looking to make when it comes to his three-point shooting, his consistent shooting, and it's still to be heard or it's still to be known if he makes that jump. And he's trying to show that once again in his third summer league with the Cavs.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody makes it. Luke mentioned it earlier today that one of the guys that he's close to in Australia, a guy who spent some time in the NBA and is now the general manager for the team that Luke plays for, he mentioned that there was a conversation that those two had after Luke's first summer league. And during Luke's first summer league, people were like, who is this dude? Like, what? He's blocking shots. He's getting steals. He's rebounding. He's tossing dimes. He's scoring a little bit in the post, showing some pretty good footwork, has an understanding of how to play the game. There were people there at summer league that were like, wait a minute, there might be something here. So after his first summer league, he goes back to Australia and he has that conversation, and he was given a list of players, draft and stash players in the past, whether from the Cavs, the Golden State Warriors, the San Antonio Spurs, any team around the NBA that had taken a draft and stash guy in the second round. He was given that list of players, and how many of them just never made it. They never came to the NBA because it just didn't make enough sense, right? Like, Luke has to believe, one, he's going to be put in a position to succeed. Two, he's going to get some kind of opportunity to play, and he's not just going to be an end of bench guy. And three, it's got to make sense personally and financially. some of these guys never come to the NBA because they can make more money overseas, Ethan, because they can be a star on their team, because they can be a big fish in a small pond, as opposed to being a small fish in a big pond here in the NBA. So it always has to make sense for that guy to make that kind of drastic decision. And some guys that have been stashed overseas, their rights are still controlled by a team 10 years later, 5 years later, however many years later. So there's just no guarantee that these guys, including Luke, will ever make it to the NBA. And at some point, he's probably going to get to a place where he says, okay, do I just abandon that dream? Do I just focus all of my attention on being the best player that I can be in Australia? Or maybe going overseas to Europe and seeing if I can play in a step-up competition there, like the step right before getting to the NBA. Yeah, I don't know what the future holds for him, but I thought it was really, really fascinating that he said he had that conversation with somebody about so many different guys that just haven't made it. And it gave him motivation, and it gave him a lot of fuel to try and be one of those guys that does make the leap, that does become something more than an afterthought for a team, that does become something more than just a name on a piece of paper that ends up getting his rights traded in some kind of salary dump move where he's a sweetener to a deal or something along those lines. Because sometimes that's what the future ends up being for some of these guys that are drafted so late in the second round and spend so much time early in their careers playing overseas. But he's still young too. That's another thing to think about. He may not look it because he's got the mullet and he's got the mustache going on and stuff like that. But he still is a relatively young kid who continues to get better, 22 years old, continues to get better, continues to enhance different aspects of his game, continues to get bigger and stronger too. He's definitely stronger and in better physical condition for this year's summer league than what I remember from last year and the year before.
And Chris, I think it's important to kind of go back to something because I cannot believe I skipped over this when we were talking about Jaylen Tyson, because you talked about paper a couple of times for what Luke Travers received when it came to guys that didn't make it. And, well, Jaylen Tyson's got a little bit of paper of his own, and it's a list of guys that he's had that he remembers, that he keeps a tally of guys that are in front of him, that were drafted in front of him, and that even were recruited ahead of him, dating back to high school. Like, and I know, Chris, you're going to touch on this in an article for cleveland.com coming soon, but my goodness, did it make me like this guy a little bit even more? Because you all know I'm a competitor. I get after it, all of those things. But Jaylen Tyson, Chris asked Jaylen this question at the press conference about, do you keep a list? Are you one of those guys that keeps a list? And he said 1,000%, not 100%, 1,000%. And then he went on to say that he remembers being ranked number 2 in Texas somewhere. And the guy that he did not name that was ahead of him still's got to see him to this day. Right. So I took the liberty of pulling up ESPN basketball recruiting from 2021 when he graduated from high school, which makes me feel old a little bit because I graduated college in 2021. But he was ranked number. Hold on now. He was ranked number 31. Say it again. I'm sorry.
I think he was number 3 or 4 for ESPN in the state of Texas.
Yeah, he's number 3. He had 3 players ahead of him in the draft class for the state of Texas for ESPN's top 50 ranking for the 2021 class. And so here are the 3 players that were above him, just to get a sense of what's going on. Damian Collins from Atlanta, Texas. Who was ranked 19th in the class and number 1 out of Texas for the ESPN ranking. The second is Harrison Ingram from Dallas, Texas. The third was Langston Love from Universal City, Texas. And I mean, these are some big names, Chris. Like this isn't a slight to Jaylen Tyson, even though he might have taken it that way because he's a competitor and he thought he could have been number one on this list or whatever. But to know that he has a list, whether it's written down, whether it's memorized by mind, that he knows that these guys had a little bump on him. And for this last draft class where he was drafted number 20 overall, he's got some names to memorize. It's 19 people in front of him and a lot of guys to attack, especially when it comes to this summer league season.
So here's one thing. Harrison Ingram was in this year's draft. He went 28 slots behind Jaylen Tyson. He was the 54th overall pick of the San Antonio Spurs. He's currently playing in Summer League. The Cavs are not scheduled to play the Spurs during Summer League. Their 4 games are against Orlando, Golden State, Milwaukee, and the Los Angeles Lakers. Dalton Connect was drafted in front of Jaylen Tyson, a few picks in front of Jaylen Tyson. Maybe he's on the list. Maybe, possibly. Add some spice to that final game beyond the briny stuff. And if the Cavs get to the championship and play against the Spurs in the championship, well then, the Harrison Ingram thing reignites. The other thing is, I wonder, Ethan, I don't know this for sure, but I wonder if one of the guys on that list is his Pac-12 rival, Tristan da Silva. And I'm going to spend the next couple of days trying to figure this out, ask as many people as I can possibly ask, because the opener for the Cavs on Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern time is against the Orlando Magic and Tristan da Silva, who is chosen by the Magic 2 picks ahead of Jaylen Tyson. And like I was reading something about Jaylen and some of the ways that he used to approach high school games when playing against players that were ranked above him by rivals or by ESPN. And his coach said that they got a better version of Jaylen Tyson in those games because he was out to play his best against those guys and show that he belonged near the top of those rankings. So I'm just wondering if the opener at Summer League, there's going to be a little more juice because his Pac-12 rival was drafted by the Orlando Magic 2 picks in front of him. And it's not just like outplaying that guy necessarily. I think there's part of Jaylen that wants to stick it to the teams that had an opportunity to draft him and did not draft him. And look, Summer League is not the NBA season. Summer League certainly isn't the NBA playoffs. But this is his first opportunity, and he's going to take every single opportunity, it feels like, to stick it to these teams or try and get the best of these players that were drafted in front of him. And his first opportunity for a little bit of draft night retribution comes Friday afternoon against the Orlando Magic.
I mean, and we talk about the list, we talk about these things and the competition, and obviously we did talk about the Cavs potentially taking Tristan da Silva if he failed at number 20, 2 spots ahead. He did not fall that far, but I mean, this just reminds me of Kobe Bryant in high school being like, "Yep, if I know you got a better article written about you, if you are ahead of me in the rankings, I'm going to kill you." Like this is crazy. Like in the attack mindedness, and like obviously Jaylen Tyson comes off as like a really funny, goofy kid, but we have not seen him go toe to toe when it comes to being on the hardwood during the game. And I'm excited. And Chris, I might call you when I'm watching the games on TV. And if I see a little fire, I'm like, hey now. I know what this article is gonna look like for after this game. But the last player that I wanted to talk about that we didn't get to talk to today is Emani Bates. And I know we continue to talk about him when it comes to Summer League because he has a lot to prove. He has a lot to show. He has a lot that he wants to do. And we talked to Craig Porter Jr. and I asked him in the press conference what he's seen from Emani Bates, and he said he's worked on his overall game, but also prioritized getting better on defense because Craig and Emani realized that that's an area of his game that could have helped him get more minutes on the floor last year. But the thing that stood out to me was that one, Craig Porter Jr. is very, very close with Emani Bates. They basically hung out together the entire time during the season. Even when Emani wasn't getting minutes, he would hang around with Craig and do whatever. But Craig said blatantly that Emani believes that he should be getting the opportunity in the NBA, and Craig believes that he deserves that opportunity as well. And I think that stands out to me just because Craig has shown one, a maturity level, and has
Mm-hmm.
shown the skill set to be able to have success at the NBA level. And for him to think that Emani could be, sure, you could be blowing smoke for your mans that you're friends with, but it could be a reality check for both of them as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, the Cavs didn't draft Emani Bates with an idea that he was going to help them immediately. He was put on a two-way contract for a reason. He went late in the second round as opposed to early in the second round or in the first round for a reason. He's got a lot to prove in terms of his ability to be a pro, in terms of his ability to be an NBA player. And you might sit there and you might say, well, he wasn't given that opportunity to do that in Cleveland. That's his reality. There is a depth chart in place. This is a meritocracy, but there's also a hierarchy in place. And there is a depth chart that has Emani Bates buried a little bit further down because, in terms of physical maturity, in terms of basketball maturity, he's just not on the same level as some of these other guys that are in front of him on the depth chart. He needs to learn to be a pro and blend into the fabric of a team. And he's in the right place, Ethan, I think, to play through his mistakes. I've said this since he was drafted. The worst thing that could have happened to Emani was him going to a situation, having a first round pick attached to his name, all these different expectations, the spotlight on him, the cameras focused on him, and a team thrusting him into a situation too soon. The Cavs are able to develop him at the rate that a 20-year-old kid should be developed at. When you're drafted 49th overall in the draft, you're going to have an uphill battle just to make it in the NBA, just for starters, to make it in the NBA, right? And most of those guys have to start their career in the G League, and they have to show something special enough in the G League to continue to get a chance. And you might sit there and you say, well, what's the difference between him and Craig? Well, Craig played a whole bunch of games in college. Craig came with a different maturity level to the NBA. Craig carried himself in a different kind of way because he had seen more, because he was older, because he was wiser, because he was more mature, because he just knew things from his life experience that Emani didn't have the opportunity to. So when you're as young as he is, as raw as he is, and drafted where he was, you tend to start your career in the G League and then try and work your way up. And that's the reality for somebody like Emani. And he's going to spend more time in the G League this year for the Cavs. And that's where he belongs right now. And Summer League is another opportunity for him to continue to get reps, for him to continue to show the things that he can do, and continue to see some of the things that he needs to keep working on to become an NBA player, because he's just not an NBA player right now. And that's okay. That's okay. I don't think anybody expects him, Ethan, to be an NBA player right now at this stage of his career, at this stage of his maturity, at this stage of his development.
And it kind of reminds me a lot of things are different. So don't fight the messenger on this one, but it's a little bit similar to Bronny James' situation, right? Because you don't want him to he kind of got the opposite of what he needed. Emani Bates got the situation where he was able to grow in a situation where he's not needed in all of those things, like Chris mentioned. Sure, Bronny isn't needed, but it's Los Angeles. The spotlight's still gonna be there. The eyes are still gonna be there. There's always gonna be the question, even if he starts his career in the G League, if he has a good game, it'll be all right, ready to bring him up. What's taking so long? Just like Emani. Or if he has a bad game, oh, why didn't he Why didn't he go back to college? Why didn't he take more time? Yada, yada, yada. Why did he get
Mm-hmm.
forced into the situation? And if he rides the bench for the Lakers, if he doesn't go play in the G League, Bronny will just sit there and won't get the development that he needs outside of the summer league opportunities. So that's kind of the give and take that we're talking about with Emani Bates' situation, and the positive that it is for him to get the opportunity to kind of be under the radar, even though he's someone that everybody, when it comes to the fans of the Cavs, has
Mm-hmm.
been talking about. He's under the radar when it comes to most of the league, and trying to figure out where he's gonna fit in for the Cavs for the future. And that's also why I think Chris and I are of the understanding that Emani Bates is going to sign that qualifying offer and come back to the Cavs and be on a two-way deal to see where he fits in for the future to come.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the qualifying offer that he was given was a two-way qualifying offer. So that's how the Cavs view him still at this point. And I think that's the right way. And the other thing is, I don't blame Emani for having ambition, right? I don't blame Emani for wanting more playing time and more opportunities and wanting to be away from the G League and see if he can do it at the NBA level. The one glimpse, really, the one major glimpse that we got of Emani, the last game of the regular season, when nobody that could dribble the ball was out there on the floor in the fourth quarter, that was a tough situation for him. That was a tough situation for Isaiah Mobley. That was a tough situation for Pete Nance. I don't think that was the situation that anybody in the organization wanted to put any of those guys into. So I don't think you can make too harsh of a judgment based on how Emani looked in that situation because of how they were asking him to play, because of the way that they were using him. But it also showed, the talent that was on the floor for Charlotte. That was basically their G League guys, right? Or guys that have been released this offseason. You know what I'm saying? So you have to try and keep it in perspective. And you have to understand that this is a team that went to the Eastern Conference semifinals, and they just don't have a place for on-court development for these kinds of guys. They're trying to win games, right? If Evan Mobley's development for the last couple of years has kind of taken a back seat, and he is one of the most important players in this entire organization, you could argue that he's the most important player in this organization moving forward. Like, if his development has to take somewhat of a back seat, you think the Cavs are going to give consistent minutes or NBA minutes or meaningful opportunities to Emani during the regular season? It's not going to happen. This is not the developmental league. The G League is where you develop these younger guys behind the scenes. But again, I don't blame him for having the kind of ambition of, I want an opportunity here. Like, I think I'm good enough to have an opportunity here, provided, Ethan, it doesn't get to a point where it becomes toxic in his own mind. You know what I mean? Like, that's the line of delineation. Like, there has to be a level of understanding from him that he's got to work his way up to something, that he's got to earn something. And he hasn't, at this point in time, done enough to earn that. And I hope he understands that within this idea that I want more, I should want more. I believe in myself in a way that maybe other people think would be silly to believe in myself to that level. But I have to believe in myself that kind of way, because if I don't believe in myself that way, nobody's going to believe in myself that way. So I think as long as he keeps it in proper perspective and he doesn't allow it to get toxic in his own mind, and start ruffling feathers behind the scenes, then I think it can be a positive attitude for Emani to have when it comes to his ambitions moving forward.
Because that can get overwhelming, right, Chris? Like, if you're pulling yourself one of two ways, like the reality of the situation where you need to continue growing in the G League versus what you're hearing maybe from yourself, maybe from your friends back home,
Yeah.
who are like, you're tearing it up, versus things that you're seeing online from the fans, like you should be
Mm-hmm.
in getting minutes in the NBA, you should be starting small
Mm-hmm.
forward, and I think that is why I was so glad to see that Amani and Craig kind of bonded together this last season, because we know Craig is a mature guy. 24, 23, 24 years old. Emani just turned 20 years old. Like these guys branching together will help Emani in the long run. And I mean, sure, this is for the fans because I had to pull his stats up just to run this through. From last year's G League season, you can look at him averaging 19.8 points per game in 34.6 minutes played, right? That's all good and well. But
Yeah.
on 17.2 field goal attempts per game, he was shooting just 38.7% from the field, and
Yeah.
10.7 of those shots came from beyond the arc, and he was shooting 34.6% from 3-point range, right? So if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
bash on NBA players for not shooting 35%, at least give yourself the decency of understanding that there's room for everybody to improve as well. And Chris,
Yeah.
I said we were gonna wrap up with Emani, but I lied because there's some news that you have for us that I feel like we should touch on before we get out of here because based on one of the players that I think could potentially be a big lift for this team if he's healthy in next year's playoffs. I wrote about it for cleveland.com, but Dean Wade was reportedly measuring the idea of getting surgery this offseason
Mm-hmm.
based on his knee injuries that he caused him to be out of the playoffs and miss almost, I believe it was 26 straight games. And I think you have news about Dean Wade and his progression this offseason. And obviously, he took some time off. But what are you hearing, Chris, about what's going on with our man, Dean Wade?
Yeah, I'm pulling up the text message right here so that I don't get this incorrect. Got so many things going through my head. So I'm told that he returned to Cleveland recently, and he is conducting full on-court workouts, which is a really, really good sign. He did consider surgery throughout the course of the season. He was wondering at the end of the season if that's something that was going to be necessary in the off season. I'm told nobody thought that that was the direction that they needed to go. So he didn't have surgery on that knee. And during these workouts, after these workouts, he isn't feeling pain in the knee. That was one of the problems that he was having. If you remember down the stretch of the season, he would try and get back on the court. He would try and increase his physical activity. And each time he would do that, he would start to feel pain. And JB Bickerstaff, when he was the head coach of the Cavs, kept talking about over and over and over again with everybody that was coming back from injury. Dean Wade, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland. It wasn't about how they looked in the workouts, it's how their body responded to that increase in physical activity. And when Dean started to increase that, especially early on in his recovery process, every time he tried to increase that, he felt pain in his knee and he just couldn't understand where that was coming from, didn't understand the nature of the injury to its fullest. And when he kept trying to do that toward the end of the regular season, his body just wasn't responding the way that he wanted it to respond. And then he just fought through it. Like the way that he was able to play in that series against Boston, he deserves a ton of credit because I'm told that he took a few weeks off, actually, when the season finally ended, to give his knee more time to recover, to see if that was going to respond the right way. And it did. And then he started full on court workouts in mid June. That's what my sources tell me. So that's all positive when it comes to Dean, because I do think that this front office still believes in him, and he's getting a fresh opportunity with a new coaching staff to show that he belongs in the rotation and he can be an asset for this team at both ends of the floor, because the idea of Dean Wade for this team is very, very logical. They want to play faster. They want to shoot more threes. They want to have more space on the floor. If George Niang is not as productive, somebody that the Cavs invested in last offseason in free agency, if he's not as productive, if he struggles the way that he did at various points throughout his first season in Cleveland, then Dean Wade becomes that guy to fill that kind of role and do those kinds of things. And the other thing that makes Dean such an asset for this team, Ethan, beyond the fact that he can guard multiple positions, is He is a low touch, low usage kind of guy who just blends in and finds a way to make an impact in that kind of role. Feels like so much of this podcast tonight has been about what role is this player going to be in, and can he flourish in that particular role? Dean doesn't need to score to make an impact, right? Dean doesn't need to shoot a whole bunch of threes to make an impact. Their rebounding is better when he's on the floor statistically. Their defense is better when he's on the floor statistically. Their offense is better when he's on the floor statistically. And it's not because he's scoring 20 points a game. It's not because he's scoring 15 points a game. It's because he does things that the Cavs need from that particular position. So I think Kenny Atkinson is going to look at Dean very similarly to the way that the front office does and the way that JB Bickerstaff did. And I think Kenny Atkinson is going to see a valuable player that deserves an opportunity if he can stay healthy. And that has been the big if for Dean. Man, ever going back to college, even at Kansas State, he was dealing with like foot injuries coming out of college. And that's part of the reason why he went undrafted. And the Cavs were able to, sign him to a two-way contract, put him in their developmental program, and turn him into an NBA rotational player. But he's got to stay healthy. And he's got to be healthy at the most important times for the Cavs. It's 2 years in a row that during the playoffs, when the Cavs needed him to be at his best, either his body wasn't 100% or his mind wasn't 100%, in part because his body wasn't 100%. So he's got to find a way to change some things, whether it's his diet, whether it's his daily routine, whether it's his recovery regimen, whether it's sacrificing a chicken or something like that so that he can get the basketball gods on his side. He's got to show that he can be healthy. As of right now, he is, and he's conducting workouts, and that's a really, really good sign. But he needs to be healthy at the right times for the Cavs because he can be an asset for this team. I truly believe that.
Yeah, and I mean, you touched on it at the beginning with how he guarded Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown when he got back and he was on one leg. Like, sure, you have to look back and you have to look a little bit deeper to understand the value of Dean Wade. The advanced stats tell it more than the traditional stats do in that sense, right? And you think about what he's been able to bring to this team when he was healthy. When the Cavs were without Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, Dean Wade was there. Dean Wade was starting. Dean Wade was picking up the slack and filling in and blending in almost seamlessly with with Jared Allen as the 5. And it feels like every time, like you mentioned, when we get to the playoffs, something goes wrong with Dean Wade. And this goes back to when he was trying to come back from having a kid and then trying to come back and practice in Houston at Rice University, and then not being able to play after that. So he had been out for a whole long time. Like, I think the Cavs have played in 17 NBA playoff games over the last 2 years. Of those 17 games, Dean Wade has played in 5. And he started one of them. Like, you think about the impact, what that calls for that. And then also understanding that when we talk about the advanced stats, Dean Wade, of players that played 50 or more NBA games this season, Dean Wade was 3rd in the NBA in defensive rating. You don't get that just by being some guy that doesn't score, that doesn't do his part and all those things. Because when we have these conversations about Dean Wade, everything that we hear is, well, he doesn't do anything on the offensive end. He doesn't produce enough, and he's usually hurt. So Dean Wade played in 54 games this past season. He started in 32. He shot 39.1% from 3-point range, and so he's productive. He's able to get the job done when he's on the floor. You want to say he gets hurt too much? Fine. I'll let you have that one. But when he's on the floor, how productive and how efficient he is can change the tide for this Cavs team, especially when he has the right players around him. We talked about it in the middle of the season last year when you had Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, and Jared Allen on the court together, plus Donovan Mitchell playing with his high basketball IQ and reading passing lanes and getting into the mix. It felt like the Cavs were a defensive stopper, and they started coining the term suffocations as a way to determine how well they were playing defensively. Like not oh yeah, we gotta stop, we gotta turnover. No, we suffocated them to the point where we had multiple times down the floor where we could tally those up and turn that into a stat.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing, right? This is a team that needs as many two-way wings as possible. If you think about some of the trade rumors involving the Cavs, we're talking Dorian Finney-Smith, we're talking about Cam Johnson. There were sign and trade rumors about the possibility of Miles Bridges. That's the kind of role that Dean Wade plays for this team. That's the type of player, not to that level as some of these guys. Obviously, some of these guys are better players than him, but that's the kind of player that Dean Wade can be for this team. That's the kind of role that he can have for this team. So if Dean can be healthy and he can be effective, and if the Cavs can't find a way to make a trade this offseason because they don't have the assets, the team doesn't want to trade that player because another team has a better offer than the Cavs, because the Cavs draft capital just isn't as strong as another team, whatever the case may be. If they can't pull off that type of trade for that type of player, then Dean becomes even more important for this team. And I know, I get it. Like, he's not Donovan Mitchell. He's not Evan Mobley. He's not Jared Allen. He's not Darius Garland. But this is a team that needs productive play from that particular spot. This is a team that needs an effective player at that particular spot. And if it can beat Dean at his team-friendly contract, given how big the salaries are going to get for a number of these guys on this roster, that will really, really help balance things out so that the Cavs don't have to go trade for, $20 million a year DeAndre Hunter or $25 million a year Cam Johnson or whatever his contract is. You know what I mean? Dean Wade on $6 million a year can be a huge bargain and a huge asset to also help the Cavs balance out the salary cap sheet a little bit in a way that they're probably going to need moving forward.
Chris, I was going to make that point as we ended this podcast, but I knew you would bring it back to money and get nerdy for us one time, so no big deal. I knew you were going to bring it back to that anyway, but I think that's a great place to stop. So, with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.